Yeah, or
You will, probably.
You go.
Okay. Okay, this is Don Faust. It's January 2nd, 2021, and I am interviewing J.L. Simpson here at Metropolitan Community Church of the Quad Cities. Would you please tell us your name and spell it for us?
my name is Jeff Lisa Simpson, Jefflisa Simpson.
Okay, and what is your approximate age?
I am in my late middle ages.
Okay, give us a brief description of your parents and siblings and what life was like for you growing up, including where you're from.
I was born in Davenport, Iowa, and I was the third child of Beverly and Lester Simpson. And my parents were married at a very early age, and I had two older sisters. And I would like to think I had a good childhood. I grew up poor, but I didn't know I was poor. My house was full of love, and I always knew that I was loved.
Great. What were some of your dreams and goals when you were a youth?
I wanted to be famous. I wanted to be either a politician or a singer. And I always kind of had a secret dream of being Miss America.
Okay.
And when those things became, when it became known that those things were not based in reality for me, I would say I always wanted to be a counselor.
What do you do for a living currently?
Right now I'm a student at Chicago Theological Seminary in Chicago, Illinois. I also am currently doing an internship at Edwards United Church of Christ for that degree. And other than that, I do a lot of homework.
Are you in a relationship or married? And yes, are you in a relationship or married?
Not currently.
Okay. Do you have any children?
No.
Did you serve in the military?
No.
Okay, so when did you first realize your sexual orientation?
I first realized that I liked men or boys. I can't remember a time when I didn't know that. I didn't understand it. I always thought it was like a secret desire to have an older brother because I had two sisters, and I thought maybe I just want, a brother. But as I grew older, and when I say older, I mean like late elementary school, all of a sudden I realized that it was no, I wanted to be held by men. I wanted to, the boys in my class, I wanted to be one of their girlfriends. And so that is the one thing that I knew for my entire life, as far as I know, is that I was attracted to persons who were gendered male.
Okay. When and how did you first come out?
I don't think I really ever had, as far as the gay part of me, when I actually identified as a gay male for most of my life, and then recently I realized that I was kind of living an untruth, that in fact I am more trans and probably am gendered female living in a male body. And I like to say that because it's kind of a double coming out process, and it's even more difficult later in life. Because I've been culturalized male, and I was kind of culturalized as a gay male. I never fit in with what I feel is like most gay folks. The signs were there, I was just reluctant to do the trans thing. And I think maybe when I was a teenager, I just didn't know anything about the trans stuff. And so I just went along with the whole gay thing because that was something that I kind of was familiar with. And that was a hell of a lot easier to live as a gay male than a trans person, and that tells you how bad the trans part can be. So I guess when I finally came out to my family, it's like they knew. And I didn't say anything about it until age 30, after the man I had been united with in a civil union, holy union, left me, and I needed to talk to my mother, and I just said, I'm gay, and she said, yeah, I've known it all your life, and that was my coming out for that.
And how do you identify today then?
Today I identify as, my sexual orientation is both homosexual and heterosexual, because I identify as both male and female, two-spirited, so depending on what gender I am presenting as, and I always know that the gender and biological sex of my partner is male, but sexual orientation relies upon both parties, and so it's confusing. So I'm gay and straight.
Early during your coming out, were there places you felt more at ease about displaying your identity?
No. When I was in my teenage years, my father, we belonged to a fundamentalist church, and I was not accepted there. In fact, I ended up being exiled from there. And I never felt safe at school until I met my best friend, who's still one of my best friends, in high school. And we thought we were the only two gay people in the world. But we were the brunt of a lot of jokes. And so the only place I felt safe was, we used to have a riverfront park here known as the Levee. And I was too young to get into bars or to the other adult shops in the city. And so me and my two friends that were also 16, we would go down to the Levee and we would meet people. We made friends down there, we would meet other guys, and we felt safe there until the cops would come in and kick us out, and then we had nowhere to go. And it wasn't until I was 19 that I could feel that I could go to gay bars. But my first gay bar that I went to and felt safe in was in Omaha, Nebraska, and their age was 21, but I had drawn on a little mascara mustache and they let me in. But once I walked in and saw the lights and the music and the same-sex couples dancing and the drag queens, I was like, I'm home.
Great. And you've kind of already alluded to this. Were you accepted at home by your family?
I was, not so much by my dad. Okay. He had a hard time. He loved me, and still does, but his religious beliefs interfere. And it was surprising to me that I was fearful of ever telling my parents, because deep down inside I knew that I would not be one of those people who were rejected by their parents. And so the trans thing, that is still a secret. But I'm inching my way into, my mother knows, but I'm inching my way into easing the others into it. But as I started this interview, and mentioned that I'm no spring chicken, that time is going to have to be accelerated, and so it's like a weekly process for me to make them more aware of that. And I would like to also say that despite my family being accepting of my sexual orientation, in recent years I have learned that perhaps some of them weren't so accepting. And that hurts in this day and age.
What about coworkers over the years?
Coworkers, it was always, in the early days of my young adulthood and work, it was always interesting because I worked in restaurants, and so it really wasn't a big thing. Me and my best friend from high school, we worked at Perkins Restaurants. We were the first 2 male waiters in the entire country for that chain. But we did not hold back there. And so that was interesting. But when I started working in other places, sometimes I would have to hide it. And one of those places was a mental health center here in town. And I found so much bigotry and hate in that place among the staff that I hid it. But it was kind of funny because I was asked about it once, and from a coworker, and I said, yeah, I'm gay. And she was complaining to me about, why did you tell us? Why did you tell us? Because I like to see you folks suffer a little bit thinking about it. But for the most part, I've learned that I can't hide those things because it never works. And in more recent years, it's who I am. And I think my last job was with the state, and I would say there were some people who were okay with it and other people who talked behind my back. But I'm sure that happens to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of, again, you've also kind of alluded to this, but what was your parents' reactions to your coming out, or I guess when you finally did tell them, or however you did it?
My mom was like I said, Mom was like, oh, I've known all along. But my father was, it took him a while. Mm-hmm. And I still don't know if he's at one point my dad thought everybody in the world was gay. He would ask me, are you gay? But it was my 40th birthday party that I had at Mary's. And I had a surprise birthday party for myself. And my dad came. And he had the time of his life. But I had some coworkers there, and then his older sister came, my aunt. And so that was kind of a really period of growth for Dad, to that it's okay. I don't know if he still believes that, but he loves me. Mm-hmm. I think it was much harder for my parents when they discovered my HIV status in '92.
Okay.
I hid that for a long time, as most of us do. Back in those days, it was a death sentence. So I think that probably maybe eased the gay thing a little bit, because that was harder for them to look at.
What about friends over the years that you're connected with? I mean, did you have good experiences, bad experiences, all of the above, none of the above?
I am fortunate that my two friends from high school, we were like the three gay musketeers. We are still friends. And one of them is actually my roommate, and the other one is in Aurora, Illinois, and the three of us spent every Christmas Eve together for 40 years. Oops, I just gave away my age. I have had most of my friends throughout my life have been very fair weather. I think some of that was due to my maybe not being true to my own identity. I've lost a lot of friends, some to death and others just not always easy. But I attribute that to also the stress of living in our world, being a minority.
How has coming out affected your life?
I think reaching adulthood in the mid-'80s and through the '90s, when the world wasn't so friendly to at least gay people, they're still not friendly to the other letters, but I think that affected very much my life. I think I was denied jobs. I was fired once, and I believe that the main reason was for my sexuality. I always tell a story about going into an interview, and you see the typical heterosexual, married with 2.5 male, generally, conducting the interview. They get up, shake your hand, and then about 10 minutes through the interview, they realize you're not married. And so I think even though I was an excellent student, I'm smart, I'm very creative, and even though those attributes were there, in those days that didn't matter. It was just a liability they thought, for companies to hire people like me.
All right. What has frightened you most about coming out? I guess you can use either coming out.
For the gay one, it was fear of rejection from my family, mostly. For the trans one, it is some of the same, but in our world today, people still think that's strange. I mean, it's getting better, but the media has constantly portrayed trans people as either something to laugh at, or something to make fun of, or something psychotic that's going to kill you. And so there's a fear, whenever I present fully in my identity as Lisa, there's a fear of not being perfect enough, because that's life or death for me. And so it's that constant fear of, what's the term, being clocked as a T could end my life. And what that is, that's from the show Pose, where they talk about when somebody figures out they're trans. And so that's always a fear. And one of the things I've learned as in my journey is that I also experience what the same fears that heterosexual cisgendered women feel in public, when you're alone and vulnerable. And then compound that with the fact that if somebody did attack me and then find out who I was, that's probably the greatest fear.
Who are or have been your biggest influences in your life?
Personal influences. My mother. She's resilient and strong and kind and gentle and beautiful and compassionate. I've been influenced somewhat by one of those three friends that I keep talking about. David has been somewhat of an influence. I had the good fortune of working with Reverend Pat Bell from Grace Lutheran Church here in Davenport for 15 years, who was a big influence, led me to have this desire to become a pastor, and which is what I'm doing in my journey. And so I would say he was a great influence, and Reverend Hendricks is a good influence. And there have been several famous people that I just admire the hell out of, but that's too lengthy to go into here.
All right, what events affected you as an LGBTQ person the most over the years? What would you say?
First of all, the AIDS crisis, and in my own HIV. I was diagnosed in 1992, and that was a death sentence at the time. And that has affected me to this day, because I was a guinea pig for some of the new drugs, and I'm experiencing a lot of the things, the side effects that those are now bringing. And when you're living with HIV in a world that still after 30 years has no clue what that's like, that's definitely been a contributor to some of my struggles in life. The blockades put up for me, whether it be romantically with people and being rejected, or even rejected among other gay people. It just puts me in another class of oppression. And I'm one of the few that actually is still alive from those days. I heard there were 33,000 of us left in America that were diagnosed before 1996. And that's difficult because nobody knows a clue what I'm going through right now, because it's all new. And I would also say the death of Matthew Shepard affected me horribly. In 1988, I was sexually assaulted and assaulted horribly. And I had gone out for the evening, and there was a man at one of the local bars, and I danced with him for a couple hours, and we talked, and he bought me drinks, and we went to a motel, and he proceeded to tie me up and slice me up, and horrible things to me, and I was left for dead. And I faked my death to get him out of there, and to this day it affects me because he beat my face pretty bad, and I can't smile fully because the nerve ending's gone. It was never caught, and I was told by the police that I should be more careful, and that I probably deserved what I got. The cop that found me saved my life, but the detectives were the ones who I'm referring to there. And so when Matthew Shepard was found that way, I realized that could have been me. and to see all the hate that surrounded that death. And knowing that, once again, that's how the world felt about me too. And of course I look at the optimism from that, because what his parents have done with the foundation, and that really changed a lot of people's mind. It kind of forced folks to say, yeah, he was murdered by those two men, but we all had something to contribute to that. And I think that was a major factor in some folks changing their mind about queer people. And so yeah, that was a big event.
What do you believe has stayed the same throughout your entire life, and what has changed?
The love of my family, especially my parents, has stayed the same. And unfortunately, the lines of division in our world have stayed the same. Some of them get less abuse or notice, but I think there's so much hate and oppression in our world, whether it be based on LGBTQ or religion or race, sex, class. And I think that stayed the same, if not gotten worse for some of those. And I think that affects us all. It affects me as a trans person, because I even feel that those divisions within the LGBTQ community, when marriage equality became a reality in this country, it certainly lifted the L's and the G's up, and almost to a point where I think many people in our society are able to say, okay, they're more like me now. They've become more like the American family, because they can marry and have kids, but there's so many that were left behind, and those are quiet voices. And so I unfortunately, I think those are the things that have stayed the same and don't seem to change. We do have changes. I know every generation you see a little bit more towards civil rights movements, and like I said, just mentioned the marriage equality, that has changed, and I think that's wonderful. That 7th and 8th grade kids can go to their school dances and think about someday maybe I'll get to marry like the rest of these kids, because I remember feeling that way. But at the same time, as I age, it just gets so exhausting to keep fighting battles that love should take care of.
Let's see, what was it like? You kind of alluded again towards this, but I guess maybe kind of recalling some of your growing up years. What was it like being LGBTQ, specifically here in the Quad Cities?
It was terrible. But I just remember, I grew up in the time when it was popular to say the last one out of Iowa, turn out the lights. And I remember a city that was just dead. There was nothing to do. And I think, that spilled over as being, identifying as gay. I mean, there was really nothing to do except be a target of the bullies. I don't know. I just don't think there was. It wasn't horrible, I guess. I mean, I never felt like I was, walking through a war zone or anything, but it was just kind of stifled here. But then as I got older and traveled to other places, I recognized it really wasn't so bad here. I mean, people here are Iowa nice and tolerant, where some places I have visited, that's not the case. So then you have to, I think back on my adolescence, and I'm like, okay, I could have grown up here when I would travel places, and so I'm grateful for some of that. So I don't think we had it as bad as some places did, but I think, you know, I go back to that career stuff, and I felt like there maybe was more opportunity for people identifying queer in Chicago and Minneapolis and those kind of places that weren't here. I mean, I'm not sure if that faded away in those places sooner than it did here. But yeah, there was nothing for a queer kid to do in this town when I was growing up, except get in trouble.
It kind of leads me to the next question, which is, what were some of the places or events that you remember as, you know, growing up or your young adult years or whatever, as being a safe place to be out, like specifically here? I mean, where did you, I guess, where was your community, or what, you know, who is in your community or whatever?
Growing up, I go back to the riverfront park.
Okay.
I mean, and yeah, that was kind of a pickup place for some folks that would drive through. But in the summertime, you'd take a blanket and sit out on the lawn, and then, you know, I met some people that, very few people my age, except the two people that I go down there and hang out with. But we met people who were a couple years older, and then eventually when we aged into the bar crowd, we knew them already. I think, I felt like I was safe when I worked for Perkins. I felt like I was totally safe there because, yeah, they were all kind of into it. I mean, it was kind of like I was the first gay person they ever knew, and so we really had a good time with that. Other than that, I don't think there was any place safe. I know my school wasn't. I mean, I remember one particular story where this girl took my books and threw them down this big flight of stairs and called me a fag, and I had done nothing to this girl. But thankfully, one of my dear African-American girlfriends, I hung out with a few girls because they knew what it was like, and they were my protectors at school. And so nobody would mess with me, and I'm grateful for them. And I still look at African-American women with so much honor and for their resilience and love. But home, my bedroom was safe. I did have a boyfriend when I was 16, and he was a little bit older. He was a lot older, but I was safe with him in his baby blue 1978 Camaro, and so I guess pre-18, and then after I aged into the bars, it was somewhat safe to go in the bars. You never knew when. Occasionally a straight guy would come in, or a bunch of guys would come in and cause trouble. Or you might get beat up afterwards, walking out to your car. Or you might be accosted by a holy rolling Christian trying to convert you as you walked out of the bars. That happened many times. And we always kind of had fun with them, but I can't think of any place else I felt safe except with my small circle of friends.
Did you get involved with any of the nonprofits like QCAD, the AIDS Project, De La Certa, any of those at all as you got older? Or?
Yeah, I actually met Joyce Wiley. We were starting a group at the Unitarian Church, and the Lutheran minister who lived behind my house directed me to this group because he was part of it, and it was the beginnings of QCAD that we took a few steps further. And so I worked with that for a little bit, and of course I was the first HIV positive board member of the AIDS Coalition, it was called back then. I did several. I used to be part of the buddy system that they had, the buddy where you buddied up with an HIV person. I actually was a buddy because I was healthy to somebody who was not. So I worked with that program, and I also did educational things for the AIDS Project. I decided the best way to handle my diagnosis was to speak about it, and so I worked with Dr. Katz and the AIDS Project, and we went to schools and churches and all kinds of places as a forum to answer questions about HIV and to tell my experience and some other things about that. And I always like to say, I also worked with the Red Cross, who also did educational things about that. And at one point they got me a booking at Moline Public High School, and the parents threw a fit and they didn't want me to come in. And this gifted and talented class decided they wanted to hear from me. So the teacher actually snuck me into the boiler room of Moline High School to talk to his kids. And I did, and then like as those kids were graduating, they were having a little party for their class, and they invited me 6 months later. So, yeah. So I did a lot. I also was a female impersonator in those days, one of the signs that I should have known. But we used to do the We Care shows. And I also got to meet Neil Diamond. The first performance at the Mark in Moline that he did, I got to go backstage where he presented the AIDS Project with a check. So yeah, I was very, very active. And it's how I believe I healed kept myself healthy and survived.
And that would have been
92 through about 98.
So, okay.
Yeah. And I don't know if you know this, but I also won Mr. Gay Iowa, 1992.
Cool.
So I was involved.
All right. Okay. So now, speaking of AIDS, as the AIDS crisis and the fight for LGBT, or I guess we'll kind of gear more towards AIDS because we kind of haven't touched on that too much, played on a national level. How did these events affect the LGBT community here in the Quad Cities, I guess, or the AIDS? You know, what was your experience maybe with the AIDS community here?
There was the gay community was very warm about raising money and coming to the rescue of gay people. They were horrible at treating us with dignity. And I don't want to put that blanket over everybody because everybody's a different story. But for my experiences, for the most part, the lines of oppression were drawn between positive and negative, and that was difficult. And yeah, I think I'll just stop there.
Okay. Would you care to, this is not actually one of the questions I have, but would you care to share about your experiences as a bartender? Or do you want to talk about that at all?
I loved bartending.
Right. And
I met my husband bartending.
Tell us where it was, and then I guess maybe kind of approximate years and
goodness.
Just kind of give us a summary of that.
I bartended first at the Club 506 in Davenport, and then it became Club Libations eventually in Davenport under the ownership of Dean Forbes and Mike Davis. And that was most of my bartending. And I also bartended for a short time at a bar called The Connection in Rock Island, Illinois, owned by Chuck and Ernie. They were a couple back then. Bartending was fun. It was fun because at the Club 506 and Club Libations, and even to some extent over the Connection, it was a family. You had regulars, and it was just. I made a lot of money doing that. Gay people are good tippers. But there was also some sadness because there was a giant line of division between the Illinois people and the Iowa people and the bar people. And there was this hate. It was a weird thing, and it was primarily the late 80s and 90s, where you either had to be a Club 506 person or a JR's person, and then you had Madison Square in the middle, which was kind of like the neutral zone. And it was just like this weird thing. If we, the bartenders, if we would walk over there and go to JR's, we were treated like crap, and vice versa. And so there was such a division. And I primarily blame the bar owners because I think there was a big division among them. And hostility between the the three different people who had owned the Club 506. They were all very hostile to the person who owned JR's and all this stuff. And it was just like this battle that just filtered through like a toxic germ. But it was fun. Like I said, I was able to, I did shows and bartended, and that's where I met Mark. And I had a huge Holy Union in 1991 that needs to go in here too because that was a big event. I invited everybody in town. And they'd never heard of such a thing. But yeah, it didn't last much longer after that, though, fortunately, but it was fun.
Okay, this is kind of an interesting question. If you can go back and give yourself, your younger self, some advice, what would it be?
To recognize the trans thing before trying to live out my life in that lie. Number two, it would have been to, and this would have been hard because I would have liked to have been able to pursue my seminary career at an early age. That wasn't probably possible to the most extent. I don't know. Yeah, I wasn't aware of the Universal Fellowship of Metropolitan Community Churches, who was the only one ordaining LGBTQ people in those days. And they didn't even have a seminary, so I didn't, they still don't, but I didn't know they were even in existence. And so I tell myself to just find them. Find a way to have done what I was probably called to do all my life. So that would be the biggest advice. The next advice would be to, I don't know, I would go back and pat myself on the back a little bit. Because I admire that kid. I'm a survivor, I survived so much. So I would like to give that kid a balloon and say, hey, you did good.
Well, speaking of kids, so when you look around and you see the younger generation, what are your thoughts about their lives today? And they're in the Quad Cities. Is, you know, what are your thoughts about?
I'm jealous of them.
Okay.
I mean, I'm jealous, but I'm happy because it was. I feel like I've always been. I was the one who started QC Pride Incorporated here in town. I was the one who did a lot of that work with my colleagues and stuff, and I was involved in the AIDS activism and the marriage equality struggle, and I've spent years fighting for a spot in the church for LGBTQ people. So they are the recipients of that, and so I'm jealous. I'm really jealous of the kids who get the gender versus sexual orientation thing, how they're not related, and I just wrote a constructive theology paper about that, about maybe it's time to have a paradigmatic shift and separate the letters. Because the kids get it. And, nobody thinks anything of the kid who is trans. I mean, I'm sure it still happens, and it's still not easy. It's not a piece of cake out there compared to where we came from. It's heaven. It's heaven. To be able to go with your boyfriend to prom, or ride with him on the roller coaster when you're with a group of friends. The little things, the little things. The elimination of so many microaggressions towards people.
What are your concerns when you look around at younger folks?
That they take it for granted. I would encourage them to take time to check out history. I think this project is good for that. But then I can't really blame them because I'm sure there were things before us that we didn't check out. You just kind of accept the time and the space that you're given on this earth, and that's what you're concentrated on. And I would also like to see them carry on the work, be louder.
I don't know. How do you tell that?
It just should say on it.
I don't see a number. It just says recording.
Okay, keep going.
Okay. And you've kind of alluded to this too, when you're talking about patting yourself on the back, what do you think are some of your most successful, or what are your most important successes? What are you most proud of?
I was really proud to win that Mr. Gay Iowa thing that night. Because I just found, it was 6 months after I found out I was HIV positive.
So 1992?
And so, I was proud of my educational pursuit. I have a master's degree and a bachelor's degree. I'm working on another master's degree. Those are very proud moments for me. Because my family, I came from, I'm only the third person I know of in my family history who's gotten a graduate degree. And so I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the work I did during the 90s for the AIDS cause. Because I couldn't remain quiet, I tried to eliminate as much bigotry and hate by going out and speaking about it and putting a face and a personhood with the disease. And I think it made a difference. I hope it did. And I'm proud of the work that I do with the church. I'm pretty outspoken in the pulpit. And whether it be the pulpit in a gay-friendly church or one that's maybe thinking about becoming gay-friendly, or whether it's at a denominational meeting with a church who believes it's open and affirming, that I don't understand why they have to vote on that. They only have male and female bathrooms, and yet they consider themselves open and affirming. So I'm proud of the voice I have, and the way I can articulate in a gentle way that maybe would inspire people to think in different ways, more loving ways, more accepting ways, and learn that it's going to be okay if they do.
Okay. What role, speaking of religion, so what role would you like to see religion play in our LGBTQ community?
I think that I cannot think of, and I grew up in a fundamentalist church. I was born Lutheran, fundamentalist, back to Lutheran, and then at MCC. And I remember thinking the only reason people could possibly ever hate somebody for being LGBT is based in religion. There's no other reason to do that. The patriarchal hierarchy of order in our world that has always been there contributes to that, but that's also based in religious ideas and dogma. And so religion has to be the one to undo it. Because I think even to this day, most of the opposition you get to any of the legalities of the LGBT community, the rights, the freedoms, it's being opposed by religion and religious leaders. There's no other reason to hate a person for being gay, except it goes against your religious belief. And so I think it's a very important role that religion has to play. They have to be the ones to undo it. And it's slowly happening, but it's got a long way to go.
All right, so we're getting kind of winding things up here. What are some of your maybe final thoughts as far as what it means to be, today's whatever status here in the Quad Cities, and any kind of life lessons I guess you would like to leave us?
Sometimes I see the L's and the G's and the B's and the T's in our community trying to hold on to the past. You fight so hard for inclusion, and when it happens, you're missing the old gay bars, you're missing the old gay things, but it's really what we worked for. Mm-hmm. And I think it's everywhere. I don't think that's just in the Quad Cities, but I would imagine it's everywhere. And I also think it's important for us to get out to the people in this community and throughout the country the differences between sexual orientation and gender identity, because for too long we've grouped them all together, and I think it's important that we hold each other up, and we even include some non-queer sexual minorities, those people who don't fit into the traditional marriage and 2.5 kids, and we have to find space for everybody in this melting pot of people, or at the table at my church. It's time to maybe begin the next era of trying to figure this all out. I would like to, as a trans person in this community, I don't find a lot of support, either for even just questions I have. I go to Iowa City for all my medical stuff, and people have a difficult time with the trans and trans doesn't always mean transgender. It can also mean non-binary, two-spirited. People just have a difficulty with it, and I think, especially in this city. I mean, I can go to Chicago, no problem. And here they just don't get it yet, but we're working on that too.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Catherine.
This has been a pleasure, and we're signing off.
It's still recording.
Yay.
Okay, yay.
I was looking at